Hello, and welcome to Mental Health. It's a Trap. We're your hosts, Susan and Stephen, mother and son, unraveling the complexities of the mental health traps people fall in. Join us on this podcast journey as we demystify the mental health labyrinth, explore common issues, and provide you with tools to navigate this sometimes extremely daunting terrain. You can expect engaging conversations, personal stories, and probably also have a laugh or two. Access to mental health care should not be what causes you additional stress. We invite you to follow along, and together we can embrace the darkness. If you missed part 1 of this grief and loss episode, I would encourage you to pause this one, go back, listen to part 1, and then listen to part 2. Here we are jumping back into the conversation where we last left off. And so we'll also share some additional resources toward the end of the episode. However, let's jump back in to hear what the grieving mother is about to ask the grieving grandmother.
Talking about, I lost my daughter, I lost my grandchild, those kinds of things. And then this mom says to the grandmother, so can you tell me how your granddaughter died by suicide? And I near about fell off the chair. And the woman looked right at her and said, I'm not comfortable talking about that, and it's not really important. And I thought I wanted to get up and put her on my shoulders and run around the restaurant with her because I was so excited that she was able to say that out loud, right? Because people get really uncomfortable in those spaces. So the mom was very uncomfortable after that comment. And again, own it, because it's not okay to ask people personal questions, right? And you just met this woman, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So again, when we talk about that communication and being able to say to people, no, you don't have the right to ask me that. Or yes, that's okay.
Yeah. So since we're on that note, I'm going to tie in some queer stuff because that happens with trans people.
Mm-hmm.
What business is it of yours to ask what body parts or sexual organs that they have? And it happens all the time. Oh, well, what's in your pants? I know you have this. It's like, that's none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about like grief and loss, and even in the queer community, that's a huge, even though we're talking about grief and loss as it relates to death, grief is a loss, to me, a loss of anything or a change.
Yes.
And so I think that in part comes with education, because I feel like it's a norm that people want to know how people died. And even in the news, that they always try to say something. Oh, they took their life by ... like, and they'll say it. And it's like, how is that news, and how does that help people to know that someone took their life and how they did it, versus keeping that as a fact and telling people that they have the right to tell people that's none of your business, whether they say it nicely or not.
Exactly. And so I find it interesting that people don't really sometimes want to know the true answer to how we're feeling or what we're struggling with. If you want to, bring in the queer and the trans, like what people are really struggling with, though they want to know personal details about things that are none of your business.
Yeah. And they try to label you because the word's not coming to me, but like when people try to, tell you how to grieve, tell you how to live your life. And it's like, that's none of your business. This is my life, and this is what I get to do with my life. And this is how I get, again, too, like going into grieving, like if they're grieving unhealthily and you're like, no, don't do that. You're grieving horribly, or you shouldn't be doing that, right? Like telling them that's unhealthy. And it's like, okay, that's not helpful. Because
right. Right. It's more about having a conversation and communicating if you have concerns about how someone is grieving. That's very different than telling someone how to do things
Hmm.
or what you should do and what you shouldn't do. One of the biggest things I think I got out of our chapter back in the day in Compassionate Friends was don't shit on people because you don't want to be shit on either.
Hmm.
And I use that all the time in therapy. When I hear a patient or a client say, I should be feeling better, I should be getting out of bed every day, I should be, and I go, yeah, so think about the messages you are sending to your brain. You're beating yourself up when you don't even know it. So when you tell yourself you should be doing something and you don't have the ability to do it right now, it doesn't mean you don't have the ability later. Though right now you don't have that ability, then let's do the Susan what's that thing called? Scale. No. What's the thing called on a scale of 1 to 10? The lever, the whatever it's called. I can't think right now. I'm having a
Likert scale.
They say on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your pain level? So I don't like those scales. The one that I do like is can't, try, and can. That's it. And there's a lot of in-betweens between all of those. Is knowing what we're not able to do right now, and maybe we could change the words to not able right now. Though there are some things when I know there's some things I can't do. If you tell me to pick up a tractor trailer, I can't do that, no matter how much I try. So, so I think, it just kind of ties into all of that of being able to, I just lost my whole train of thought. Wow.
Well,
Get on.
I don't know if where you heard that, but for me, that comes from Darcy Sims. And so she did a lot in the TAPS world, so I knew her more there than at TCF because she helped out with their peer mentor program. And she would always say, don't shit on yourselves and don't shit on other people.
It probably did come from Darcy.
Yeah, and she was known for like toilet paper.
She had quite the personality, that lady.
And I think that's a big thing is like, even as we have this conversation, a lot of it's CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Your thoughts impact your behaviors and your actions. And so if you're in the can't, then you'll always be a can't because you're not giving yourself permission to be a can or to be a maybe or not right now. So again, we think about reframing things, like sometimes things are a can't right now, but that doesn't mean it's a can't forever, right? Kind of taking those steps, like what you do at that time. So like if I wanted to be a bodybuilder, I can't do that right now. Like I wouldn't be like, boom, I'm a bodybuilder because I want to be a bodybuilder. It takes time to build strength. So in grief, again, not getting over it, more about
heal.
Yeah, heal, but like integrate, like again, like what is healing? Healing is not permanent either. You fall down, you break a bone, you get a cut, it might heal, you might have a scar, you might have scar tissue, you might walk funny, it might not heal correctly. It's the same way with grief. And sometimes, it heals or it gets better, and sometimes it punches you in the gut. And
True.
And sometimes you live with your grief for 10, 20, 30 years because you don't know of any resources that exist. Or again, maybe you live in a small town and there are less to get to. So there's, a lot of factors. And so again, one of the reasons why we do this podcast is just to get information out there, tips and tricks, share our stories personally and professionally, but also to share other resources because in the loss of Stacy, as you are a mom and I am a sibling, there are other losses, and other ways that people die, right? So we could talk specifically more about sudden, car accident. And we talked about Kristen, and we can also mention baby Alani and baby Lucas, who have both died shortly after birth, right? So like infant death, miscarriage, stillbirth, and how those, again, like, oh, like you said earlier, like you could have other children, or if you have children, you have other children, or just, the unhelpful comments people make, even though they're trying to be well intentioned.
Right. Sometimes I say, if you don't know what to say, then don't say anything at all. Just sit in the space with them, right? Because sometimes words can be hurtful, not intentionally, and there are no words sometimes in grief. So we just sit in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's important to know that when you're trying to help someone who is grieving or who is newly grieving, is to just sit in that space, because we can't take someone's pain away. We can walk through it with them, but we can't take it away. And you're right. So we can heal, we can hope, and we can work through our grief and be in a better space in our life. And it doesn't mean that the rug doesn't get pulled out again, because it can come back. And there are some years when Stacy's birthday or anniversary, I'm okay, and other years, holy crap, just put me in a cave and put a big boulder in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think a part of that goes back to culture, attitudes, beliefs, talking about it, education, knowing or asking, like, what do we want? What do we need? And I think that's a big thing, is like, I think people always feel a need to fix. And I've seen it with Meme, as the last time were at Kendra's, and you were talking and starting to cry, she immediately went to go hug her, and you were like, no, stay away, woman.
And then I had to own a little bit of that, because I didn't realize how abrupt I was, and people noticed it there. And I did talk to her after. I said, I'm sorry I was so abrupt, though you need to give me my space when I need it. I don't need you to fix this for me. And there will be times when I will be sad. Right? So again, I had to own my reaction and behavior. And I know that it was a response of, let me say what I need to say without interruption, and talk to me about it after. Or, yeah. Now I remember that very clearly.
But I think that's, again, an awareness thing, right? Like, if she had an awareness of, like, am I being asked for a hug versus, like, I'm going to go hug this person because they're sad and I'm their parent and I want to fix it. And being like, right, recognizing that. So I think that's, an important part for people to know, because, like, there are a lot of people in, like, the grief and loss world who are huggers, and there are a lot of people who hate it. Like, they're like, stay the hell away from me. Like, don't freaking touch me.
I had a parent in my chapter that was like that, and I would joke with her, and I would say to her, because I'm a hugger. I've always been a hugger my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, is it okay if I give you a hug? And she would go, I'm not really a hugger. Okay. And she would be like hugging a board. And so now it became a challenge for me. I'm like, I'm going to get you to be a hugger. And it was just a running joke between us, though it's true, right? I mean, I went out to dinner with the kids for Amy's birthday, Sunday. And they're like, we're not huggers. We only hug you. You're the only person we hug because you make us hug you. So I don't make you. You hug me. So again, it's knowing, and some people are really like, don't touch me. You have to respect that boundary.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing, is sometimes it's only with certain people. Like, people will do things that they don't like with certain people, but not with the masses or people they don't know.
Right.
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 And, that's, and that's when we need to own our own stuff. If we're like, oh, I want to hug you, but like, no, just let me hug you, and it's like, shoot, just like stop. You're not gonna get a smack or a punch in the face or something.
I know, right? Did you want to touch briefly on the conference, about what the conference is, and we can talk about some resources?
Yeah, I mean, the conference will actually be in Bellevue, Washington next year, up here in Washington State. For anyone that might be interested, they probably won't have anything on their website right now, and it might just be the previous one or this last one in New Orleans. However, it has, I mean, the Compassionate Friends is a grief support that is specific to those who are grieving the death of a child, sibling, or grandchild. So you are a parent, sibling, or grandparent. There are roughly 500 chapters in the US and Puerto Rico. There is a growing group of Spanish speakers. So although it's not as extensive as English speaking chapters, they are growing. So big shout out to Nivia Vasquez, who does that in Puerto Rico. And she is like, if you speak Spanish, give me a call. You know, that woman is phenomenal because she knows she's a Spanish speaker, she's bilingual, but she knows that there are people who don't speak English or might not speak English as well. So she often volunteers her time to speak with people. And so
And she's great.
she is. And most of the sibling support comes on the private Facebook page. And so TCF also has a large number that are specific for parents. There is a group for men. There is a group for grandparents. There is a group for a parent whose child was a part of the LGBTQ plus community and died. And within the sibling group, I run a queer sibs grief support group. And so there are various aspects as the organization, grows and more people kind of step up, because since the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of Zoom groups for siblings. And so we have like a group every day of the week, at least 6. And they also have regional conferences, but I've never been to one of those. They're just the same as the national. They're just smaller in size. And so at them, they have workshops, they have sharing sessions, and at nationals, they have the Healing Haven. So that's where this year I did a breathing through grief, somatic breathwork session, which had a great turnout. I wanted to do more workshops, but they had a lot of submissions. And so the Healing Haven is geared toward different practices. So like when you said like, oh, people need to try different things, it's a great opportunity for people to get exposure to different practices like yoga, breath work, and fitness. And so they have a bunch of other people who are, in the community who are sharing things that worked with them. And so hopefully that kind of, in a sense rubs off. And so it gets them a little more open to trying different things. And
My favorite part is the candle lighting. and it's always best when Alan Peterson is there singing his song.
Any other thoughts on the national conference?
I think it's an opportunity for people to have support regardless of what stage of grief you're in or where you are in your grief. There are many we'll use the word seasoned, or people further along in their grief. And we have a lot of newly bereaved that come to it as well. And one of the things that I have witnessed in going to them is just taking people under your wing and supporting them through that conference, and just navigating, like, what room do I need to be in? Where is this workshop? I just need to sit. They also have a reflection room where people can just go sit quietly on their own. They have craft activities for the kids, for younger siblings that go. They have this sibling activity that they do, and the kids will, and it's kids of all ages that go out and do something in the community during the conference. So I think it really provides a lot of different opportunities for people, a lot of different workshops, and you get to choose the workshops that you want to go to. The downside is sometimes the two workshops you like are at the same time, as is in any training, right? Even in mental health. If I go to a conference and I go, oh, I want to do this one, and that one, and then I look and I go, oh, I can only pick one out of the three because they're all in the morning session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just go ahead.
That's just. Well, I mean, I think in general, sometimes if it's your first conference, it can be overwhelming. So sometimes you might do nothing. So that's where it's like getting out of your comfort zone. Whether you do one thing a day and then go back to your room, because I would guess that some people do stay in their rooms. Like they come and they stay in their room, or they come and they go do something else, or they come and they completely forget everything that happened. And I think that's a part of the grief work where, in some sense, it doesn't always have to make sense. Like they showed up and they're doing the work, and sometimes that's good enough for their healing, at least at that point where they are.
I remember in the earlier conferences when I went to them, there were times where I had an emotional hangover and I would go take a nap in the middle of the day, just because it can be very overwhelming, especially if you're newly grieving, and you're at this national conference with all of these other people, just hearing stories from others and hearing about losses, and it's a different magnitude. It's supportive and it's helpful, and it can also be energy draining on a lot of levels, right? And so giving yourself that space to say, I'm going to skip the workshop and just go take a nap, or I'm going to go for a walk in the city where I'm at, or whatever it is that you need. Or I remember at the conference that in New Orleans that we just went to, I saw this same person sitting in the same spot the entire weekend. And that was okay. And that's what it looked like he needed to do. And I did want to go over and say, have you moved from the spot? I didn't, obviously, but I was just like, oh, he's been sitting in that same spot every time I come by. And that's okay. That's what he needed to do. Mm-hmm. No judgment.
Yeah, everyone's experience, obviously, like you said, it's unique, and everyone's experience is going to be different, and their needs and wants are going to be different, and that could look like going to the pool or going to a restaurant nearby, or sometimes for the siblings, a lot of what happens is more in between the workshops and at night when they connect. Although workshops are, important to some people and are helpful, again, sometimes the connections are more made because you're sitting one-on-one with people, you're able to connect and relate. And, for the siblings, it's grown to a point where their workshops, it's just for the sibling workshops are, for the most part, 100% for siblings, unless it says this is a panel that is of siblings for parents.
That Keith can beat you up at.
Pretty much. And and then we have the opportunity to go to the parent workshops without being kicked out. Now, one of the downsides is, unfortunately, not all parents are supportive of siblings, and sometimes they say things like, you don't belong here, which has happened. Not, I want to say not as often, but, just one of the things that again, can, scare people from wanting to come back and to go. And so that's why we've pushed so hard to have our workshops so that we can have that support for us. And as we get older, starting to recreate, because there were a lot of younger siblings, 17 years ago, and now we're all 17 years older. And as we get younger siblings, we're starting to recreate having more activities that are specific for children's grief and support. And there are sibling chapter leaders that, and Keith is the person that runs a workshop on how to start your chapter as a sibling chapter leader.
Cool. So I think that, we'd like to also share resources of where people can at least go and explore if you're in the grief journey or you know of someone that you might want to share a resource with. So obviously the Compassionate Friends, as Stephen mentioned, is a resource for parents, siblings, and grandparents. So they have their own website, and I think it's tcf.org. I'm not sure. And so what other resources do we have, Stephen?
If it is military related, there is the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. That is TAPS. If you're looking for children resources, books, there is the Dougie Center. There is the National Alliance for Children's Grief. And there's also Camp Erin, which they have different locations throughout the U.S. where they'll do a grief and loss camp for children and teens.
Oh, and by the way, it's compassionatefriends.org, not tcf.org. Correction.
If it is a miscarriage, there is the MISS, MISS Foundation, the MISS Foundation. There is also, I'm going to forget his name right now, but it is the Center for Loss in Life Transitions. There are a lot of books that have been written, articles. I'm seeing his face, but I'm forgetting his name. He also does grief certifications. On the flip side, there's also David Kessler, and David Kessler is with grief.com. He also does a grief education certification and also has support groups from Tender Hearts. And so he has a bunch of different groups. He has one specific for the LGBTQ community. He has one for parents, for siblings, for, I believe, widows. There are a bunch of different options that people can join. I believe with that, there is a $34 a month for access to the group. And then he, I believe, also has scholarships available for those who might need it. And it's highly interactive, so it is more of a formal group. So there's kind of a structure to it versus just a sharing component. So it helps you to kind of navigate your grief. And then the last one is Grief Share. They have a 12-week group that they go through. Oftentimes the groups are for free, and sometimes they only charge, I think, about $20 that covers the workbook.
Okay. I did look up Center for Loss and Life Transition. Is that the one you were talking about?
Yeah.
Dr. Alan Walfelt?
Yeah. So he's been in the grief and loss world for a very long time. And when I was working at TAPS, we were able to go to a couple of his workshops. So if you complete 5 of them, you get a certification, but it's definitely more of it's a lengthy process because they're each a week long, and it does cost money to attend and to travel to those events. So depending on where you are in your grief journey, that might be something that you could look into, or again, look into any of these resources to either support yourself in your grief journey or to help others.
And I think the last few resources that I want to put out there that run groups within the community can be home health and hospice. They do run groups as well. And a lot of the local hospitals have grief groups as well. So those are 2 other options, particularly for the more rural areas or places that don't have as many resources, is to check out the local hospital or the local hospice agency, and or churches might do them. So there are resources. It's just knowing where to look, right? So that's kind of navigating the systems to try and find what we need.
Yeah, and we also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of, again, other losses and types of deaths, because there's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and they have a lot of information. They do have groups that you can find for suicide loss. Is it the Alliance of Hope?
So yes, it's the Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors.
So that's another one. I'm sure there is one specific for homicide, for murder. And all these losses that we talk about are losses that, people come to the Compassionate Friends and find support. Cancer, and anticipatory grief. So again, kind of like a cancer or a terminal illness where someone might be dying. It could be like dementia, where there's like a double death where they die because they forget who you are, and then so you grieve that, and then you grieve when they have their actual death. And then again, guilt and shame because you're like, I shouldn't be feeling like this, or I was already grieving, but now I'm grieving again, or what the hell is this? And again, we could probably go on and on this topic because there's just so much that we could talk about. And if anyone is interested in being a guest to share your story, we would love to have a discussion. Again, it's informal. We're just going to connect and ask questions and connect and share our perspective. And I think that's just a part of how people learn and grow, is when we are able to share our stories and also see ourselves. So ours is specific to to car accidents, to infant deaths, to other, and we've had other deaths that we've experienced within our families and friend circles. So those are, again, even in that is another topic of when you're a friend, when you're a coworker, when you're, what's it called? When you no longer have a relationship with the person and then they die and you grieve that death, right? Again, there's so many.
Exactly.
So the last thing I will also leave as a resource is, a fellow friend and, sibling and parent, the Dr. Horsleys, Gloria and Heidi. They also have Open to Hope, which is Open to Hope, I think it's .com, that they have a TV show in New York. They have YouTube videos where they talk with people, and they have their podcast where, excuse me, they talk with people about, hope after loss. And one of their big things for them, as they're called Open to Hope, is if you don't have hope, lean on ours. And I think that's a big thing in the grief and loss world, is that sometimes
just seeing other people who are further along it kind of gives you an idea of like that could be a place that you could get to too.
Right. Yep.
So if there are any questions, comments, we'd love to hear them. And of course, we will most likely continue this conversation another time, especially if people say they want it. So again, if you want to be a guest, reach out to us and we will connect and take it from there. So we appreciate you listening to this episode, and we hope you take care.